Hear now God's word from the Apostle Paul's pen. Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of services, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in every one. To each is given a manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. To one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom, to another the utterance of knowledge according to the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by the same Spirit, to another the workings of miracles, to another prophecy, to another the discernment of spirits, to another various kinds of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues, all these activated by one and the same Spirit, who allots to each individually just as the Spirit chooses. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. This is the word of the Lord. So if you have not asked the question that forms this Sunday's sermon title, then God bless you. I know I can count on you to sit tight for the next 20 minutes and pray silently for the rest of us. If, however, this question has entered your mind, if it's troubled your heart, if it's surfaced in conversation, then this is for you. And for me, because I count myself among you. One of my favorite experiences over the last several months has been that moment after worship when one of you comes to greet me in the narthex following the service. Sometimes there is a tear in your eye. Often there is a big smile on your face, and you say, "This is the first time I've been back." It's been a year or 2 years or longer. Having preached in this empty sanctuary those many months, I no longer take that greeting line for granted, nor your commitment to being here. The joy I feel in welcoming you home is, I must say, partly diminished by a more sobering thought that quickly follows. How many others have not yet returned, may never return? How can we reach new neighbors, discouraged former worshipers, wounded believers, and the understandably skeptical or cynical? The prophet Isaiah says that God will gather the outcasts. God will gather those not yet gathered. How? Last week I had lunch with a friend and a colleague who also serves a large congregation in our city, and inevitably the questions came up early in our conversation. Are people coming back to church there? What percentage of your pre-pandemic in-person Sunday morning worship attendance are you seeing these days? And which strategies are you using to bring them back? Now, broadly, studies and surveys suggest that the answer to the second question is something like 50%. Half. It's worth pausing on that statistic for a moment. The church is not a business, but imagine the response if a business lost 50% of its customers in a 2-year span. And then consider that this is what many pastors and church leaders have been dealing with since the spring of 2020. The stages of grief look something like this. We had panic, frustration, soul searching, grasping for anything that bore the resemblance of a solution, technical changes and reinventions of every kind. We've seen them all. And at this point, I'm in a rush to tell you that second is different. That our number is well above 50%, that our live stream viewing more than makes up for the loss of our in-person attendance. I want to reassure you, I want to defend us. But I'm not sure that's the most helpful response. More importantly, I'm not sure it's the most faithful response. The truth is that these recent years have only accelerated persistent trends that we have observed for decades. I think it better to name the question many are asking, just as one of you did last spring as I was putting this series together, when you sat down in my office and you said, "Do we need church at all?" Empirical evidence would suggest that the answer is no. You who are here, you who are watching on the live stream together, represent a minority of the United States population for the very first time. Last year, 2021, church membership dropped below 50% for the first time since George Gallup began asking the question in 1937. It was 73% that year and 70% as recently as 1999. The reasons for this decline are as unique and diverse as the population it represents, despite the attempts of many to boil it down to the one cause. You've read those articles. I've heard them all. The church is too conservative. The church is too liberal. The church is too political. The church is too disconnected from societal issues. The church is trying way too hard. The church is not trying nearly hard enough. The church is too boring. There's too much else going on. The competition has increased on Sunday mornings. We just aren't relevant anymore. Any trend this widespread is also complex. But there are some threads that hold it together. I think they're worth naming. There is clearly a generational divide, as younger Americans are far less likely to attend or belong to a faith community. The leading cause is a sense, either from direct experience or reputation, that churches are exclusive or judgmental. The shameless promotion of Christian nationalism, a political movement thinly veiled in pseudo-Christian language, exacerbates the impression that the church is just another area of our common life divided by ideology. And of course, the crazy busy culture we explored 2 weeks ago is another factor. Now, sociologists will tell us that this decline in church attendance and membership is not a neutral phenomenon in the broader culture. The positive impact of congregations is quantifiable and it is significant. Churchgoers tend to be more active citizens, more committed volunteers, more generous givers, and more engaged neighbors. Not just the church loses when membership and attendance drops. Now, at this point, you may be thinking, will he ever answer the question? Probably you think you know how I will. Do we need church? No. We need God. We need meaning. We need purpose. We need a sustaining sense of the holy in the ordinary and the mundane, the challenging and the difficult. Do we need church? No. We need each other. We need communities of depth. We need friendships. We need fellowship. We need an authentic sense of genuine belonging rooted in something other than our ideas and perspectives. And church at its most basic and at its best is the place we find what we need: an encounter with God, a community of grace. Yes, you can meet God in the beauty of a sunset or a long walk on the beach. Yes, you can meet God on a daily devotion delivered to your phone or your email inbox. Yes, you can be connected to other people in powerful ways at a concert or a football game. And yet, where but the church, with all its failings and faults, do we put ourselves in the position to experience the presence of God in community? Where but the church, with all its division and discord, do we earnestly seek a deeper unity grounded in a purpose bigger than ourselves? Where but the church do people of every living generation gather weekly for nourishment and inspiration? Where but the church do we humble ourselves, check our egos, and confess our sin to receive God's forgiveness? Where but the church are we given the command to love not just people like us, but all God's beloved children? Where but the church? In his first letter to the Corinthians, Paul writes to a congregation he loves that has become entangled in bitter argument, distracted by division. He gently calls the Corinthians back to the purpose of their gathering, urging these disciples to return to this basic truth: we belong to each other. Later in this chapter, Paul will say that there is one sentence that no follower of Jesus can ever speak to another follower of Jesus. It is this sentence: I have no need of you. Community is not incidental to Christian faith or optional for faithful living. Maybe like me, you learned this song in Sunday school, and here I break my prohibition on singing from the pulpit. The church is not a building. The church is not a steeple. The church is not a resting place. The church is the... What a wonder that God has entrusted such a mission to you and me. What a joy to see these fragile human vessels carry precious divine gifts together. The church matters because God says so. A word of testimony: I am here because I have discovered that the church is the place I find what I need. I am here because I have met God in beautiful and broken communities of faithful people. I am here because I've found purpose in the courage of disciples who pull together to make a difference for their neighbors in need. I am here because I've found joy in the wonder of worship and in genuine relationships. I am here because I have experienced God in community. It started early for me. Gloria Carell rocked me in the nursery and kept me in her home. Ralph Moore surreptitiously passed sticks of juicy fruit chewing gum to quiet me down in the pews. Never an angry look, never an unkind word, just another stick of gum. I'm here because Mrs. Julia Wetmore taught me children's songs, and Jen Reed Mitchum took me to Montreat in 8th grade, and Lena Cooper waited at the back of the sanctuary to give me a hug after service every single Sunday. I'm here because saints of the church prayed for me and taught me and encouraged me. I'm here because the church took seriously its call to show up in my life, and because I have been so deeply blessed, I'm determined to pay those gifts of the Spirit forward in my life and in this church. That's our call, Second Church. Each and every one of us given something to do to show who God is. Not one of us left out. All of us essential to this transformative mission. The church needs you. And yes, you need what only the church has to offer. Late Wednesday afternoon, this sanctuary was filled with faithful souls bearing witness to the life of a saint whose earthly life has ended. They were the church on Wednesday afternoon, gathered in celebration and determined to care for a grieving family. They were the church. This morning, 3 families stood on this chancel and they offered their most precious gift, their child, to your care. And you promised that you would be the church for these children. So the next time you're on the fence about showing up, or annoyed by a chatty toddler in the pew, or considering your commitment to your congregation, or wondering whether you have a part to play in this place, remember what you said. You promised that here in this place, Willa and Thea and Wilhelmina would encounter God, and they will. Because the same Spirit who called the earliest Christians to unity and mission is calling you now. Be the church. Spirit-led disciples standing ready to offer what you have to serve the common good. Be the church, alive with possibility and hope. Be the church where every person is welcomed, valued, included, and embraced. Be the church, committed to unity because everyone has a part to play, a place to belong, and none of us can say to another, I don't need you. The author Anne Lamott shares a story that her minister told in a sermon. When the minister was 7 years old, her best friend got lost one day. The little girl ran up and down the streets of the big town where they lived, but she couldn't find a single place she recognized. She couldn't find a landmark. She was frightened and she began to cry, and finally a policeman stopped to help her. He put her in the passenger seat of his police car, and together they began to drive circles around the town. They did this until finally the little girl saw her church. She pointed it out to the policeman and told him confidently, "Sir, you can let me out of the car now. That's my church, and I can always find my way home from there." That's my prayer for our sisters baptized this morning. That's my prayer for all of you. That's my prayer for each beloved child of God. And may it be so in this church. Amen.